Dozens of incarnations of Spider-Man have appeared on our screens over the past few decades, and everyone likes to debate over which one adapted the character and his stories the best. Spidey has had a particularly varied and unique history with animation, with almost everyone having a different favorite and least favorite show of his. But with live action, it's clear that one version of the web-slinger reigns supreme. I'm of course talking about the Spider-Man from the Electric Company.
Where did I put that giraffe and the sneezing powder? Spider-Man! You...
Tom Holland's got nothing on this. When people discuss the cartoons that Spider-Man has to his name, the four that usually come up are the 90s Spider-Man the Animated Series, the Spectacular Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man, and the 2017 reboot, Marvel's Spider-Man. There have been others, like the 2003 CGI series that looks like a PlayStation 2 cutscene, and the 60s series, which is too perfect to be criticized, but those aren't quite as popular or well regarded as what I want to cover today. When I reviewed what had aired of the 2017 series last fall, I got loads of requests to look at these four main shows, and today I'm going to do just that. I've seen exactly 26 episodes, or 1 to 2 seasons of each series, to put them all on an even playing field in terms of comparing them to each other. This means that in due time I will be returning to Marvel's Spider-Man as well, to get my thoughts on the remaining 18 episodes of Season 1. This video will only cover the 90s series and Spectacular. I originally intended to cover them all here, but considering that my script ran very long, and how long it's been since my last video, I'm splitting this up into 2 parts, and I'm planning on covering the other 2 shows in a few weeks' time. Don't worry, the second part's definitely going to be longer than this one. I'll be judging each show from my personal perspective and opinions, and not by how much of an impact it's had or how faithful it is to the comics that it's based off. If one of these shows makes a reference to a character or storyline from the comics, that's cool, but for me that's not really the appeal of Spider-Man media, and as such it won't really be taken into account when I give my rankings for each show. With all that out of the way, let's start our look through nearly 25 years of animated history with the best Spider-Man cartoons. There will be opinions and spoilers, so you've been warned.
Today's episode, Spidey meets the Spoiler. And let's hope our favorite web-slinger hasn't also met his match.
To fully enjoy Spider-Man the Animated Series, you need to understand the circumstances under which it was produced. This was an era before any Spider-Man film, before the characters and stories became known to those outside of fans of the comics. The series was responsible for introducing many audiences to classic stories and plotlines, and shaped what Spider-Man was to a lot of people. I wasn't fond of the 2017 reboot, kind of retelling classic stories without adding anything really new or unique to them, but that tactic can be forgiven here, because without this series doing that, those stories might not be quite as well known as they are today. The other thing to note is that the series was animated by Japanese studio TMS. They were responsible for animating much of Batman the Animated Series and Animaniacs, but also played a hand in many cheap shows from the 80s and 90s, like a few from the Disney Afternoon lineup and the anime Sonic X, which I've covered before, where the animation consisted of mostly lip flaps and panning across still images. The animation on this Spider-Man series falls somewhere between these two tentpoles of quality for the company. Now, I like the colorful 60s comic-inspired look of the series, and most of the characters are pretty well designed. We have guys like Venom, who's super menacing and has a great deal of detail in his color palette, but we also got Rhino, who is never seen at a flattering angle. When it comes to the movement, this show looks passable, with only a few exceptions. There's a breathtaking dream sequence from the first alien costume episode, but nothing else really comes close to that level of quality. The action scenes move at a decent pace, though none of them really stick out to me. But when corners were cut, you could see them from a mile away. There's so many instances of small clips being reused. Sometimes they're flipped, sometimes the background is inconsistent, and sometimes they poorly sync old footage with new audio.
In the end, Silvermane will be the one to occupy that grave.
Then there's moments that I can't tell whether or not they're errors or just products of sheer laziness. In the episode Mutant's Revenge, the Hobgoblin steals mutant genetic research data, and when he finds the computer that holds this data, all it displays is a white screen with the words Mutant Genetic Research on it. That must have helped him find it a whole lot. Every once in a while, they'll intersperse shots with 3D backgrounds with scenes that have Spidey swinging around New York. They look alright, if a little jarring, but sometimes they go really overboard with them, like in the episode Duel of the Hunters. Alright, we're panning across the city. We're still panning. We're not quite there yet. Still panning. Waiting for the shot to end. And there we are. That didn't take long at all. This series almost feels like it was produced in the 80s with how cheap it is, but despite having hardly aged well at all, I think that Spider-Man the Animated Series still holds up. It knew that it couldn't deliver cutting-edge action, so instead it focused on developing its characters, and that's where the series shines. We see how Peter's decisions as Spider-Man impact his social life and the safety of his friends and family behind the mask. But also, the villains all have tragic backstories that help you sympathize with them before they get sent to the Slammer. Sure, the Kingpin is a dangerous crime lord, but his wife left him, and that's pretty sad. To compensate for the sympathy given to them, a few of the villains are met with exceptionally brutal ends. The Vulture mutates into a monstrous spider, and Silvermane de-ages back into being a baby. That'll teach him not to break the law. Both Mary Jane and Felicia Hardy are sadly relegated to just being characters who Peter disappoints because of his Spider-Man shenanigans. But then there's episodes like Hydro Man, where we get some insight into how MJ was raised. She even plays a big role in saving the day.
So let me get this straight. This woman faces the most powerful supervillain ever, without falling to pieces. And I, Mr. Superhero, am whining about getting sick? Maybe I could learn a thing or two from her.
This series caught me off guard with how much I laughed too. Spider-Man has a lot of one-liners worth a chuckle, and there's a witty gag every now and again, though some feel like they belong elsewhere.
Enjoying the flight? Some flight? No Peanuts? No Stallone movie? I'm out of here!
Wait a second.
Talk about low-budget flights, no food or movies, I'm out of here. I like running better.
I think that may just be the strangest connection I've ever found while making a video. The voice cast on this series is very solid, with my personal favorites being Hank Azaria as Eddie Brock in Venom, because it's cool to see the guy voice in an action show when I'm used to hearing him on The Simpsons, Mark Hamill as the Hobgoblin, and Jim Cummings as Shocker, because it's Mark Hamill and Jim Cummings, and Ed Asner as J. Jonah Jameson, who kind of set the groundwork for the character that J.K. Simmons would build his portrayal off of.
If anything happens to her, I'll...
You're right. You're not in a position to do anything.
Don't count on that, you six-armed squid.
No, Jonah, no.
You're a symbol of everything that's wrong with this country.
J.
You're a
Jonah
lunatic.
Jameson,
A lowlife
the great
destroyer.
communicator.
Christopher Daniel Barnes also puts us all into voicing Spider-Man, and when he gets into it, he really gets into it.
You can't escape me. I'll chase you to the ends of the earth.
Season 1 of the animated series is real good. There's both standalone episodes that introduce a new villain, and 2 to 3 episode arcs that flesh out stories like the Venom saga. There's a bit of continuity throughout the entire series, and getting to see Eddie Brock become increasingly infuriated with Spider-Man over the first couple episodes helps make his transformation into Venom feel very natural. Season 2 tries to be a little more ambitious, and has a season-long story arc about Spider-Man losing his powers when it's convenient to the plot, as he slowly undergoes a mutagenic transformation. We get some good episodes like the short arc where the X-Men just show up and they do a cool team-up, and this oddly chilling episode where Peter mutates into a spider creature and has to be stopped by Kraven. But what bogs the season down are a long string of episodes focusing on Spider-Man chasing Morbius, a student-turned-vampire in search of plasma, which is definitely not blood. These episodes add in characters to the chase, like the Punisher and Blade, to try to mix things up, but all of them feel samey and rather boring. When you take into account the credits, intro, and recap, each episode only has roughly 17.5 minutes to tell its story, and that seems to have really impacted the amount of growth each episode could add to the story. It would have been better if the series either shortened the plotline or just focused on something else for this season. Season 2 doesn't kill the quality of the show for me, and you can tell that the storytelling was getting better in some respects, but if you skip around while watching this season, you won't be missing much. All in all, from what I've seen of it, I give Spider-Man the Animated Series a score of 7.5 out of 10. The show may have been limited in both animation and storytelling to an extent, but the layers it gave to nearly all of its characters help make it worth a watch even today. Having a lot of goofy areas that are fun to make fun of isn't really a bad thing either. I would recommend that you watch this show even more if there wasn't an alternative that was better in nearly every way.
Well, Bruce, I saved the world again. And what do I get for it? As usual, zilch. Nada. Nothing, that's what.
Heck of a job, Spider-Man. Thanks.
Did he say thanks? Someone thanking Spider-Man? Oh, that's a first.
Going into this video, you probably already knew that The Spectacular Spider-Man is a great series, either because you've already watched it, or because no one will shut up about how great it is. I don't fault the fans who love this show to death though, because I adore it just as much as them. Nothing about Spectacular feels out of place. Every piece of it works well with another to build a show that is a thrill to watch. Unlike the animated series that came before it, both of Peter's lives are equally as entertaining to watch. The day-to-day high school drama and budding romance is very compelling because of a consistently strong, layered cast. Characters that were very one-note in previous incarnations like Harry Osborn, Gwen Stacy, and Mary Jane are all fleshed out beyond a trademark character trait, and the latter two play roles in Peter's life that aren't always the damsel in distress or the love interest. Flash Thompson even ended up being my favorite character to watch. I know that Eddie Brock is a popular favorite for actually being a likable character who gets corrupted rather than a stubborn jerk, but this version of Flash is the ultimate Chad, therefore making him the best character by default.
I will be brief. Your noble son is mad. Mad call I it. For to define true madness, what is to be nothing else but mad? This is supposed to be English?
Other forms of media have portrayed him as just a bully, but Spectacular gives him an ego the size of New York and lets him react to his world being flipped upside down. I laughed at Flash's antics during almost every appearance he made, and he even gets a great redemption arc in Season 2, where his attempts to date the more introverted Shashan turn him into a better person. J. Jonah Jameson has his best animated rendition yet, with the loud and egotistical, yet occasionally heartfelt performance that Darren Norris provides him, giving J.K. Simmons a run for his money. Peter himself is actually able to learn and grow throughout the series. In the 90s series, it seemed like Peter would often end up right back where he started at the end of his adventures, but Spectacular is built around fixing this problem. Producer Greg Wiseman stated in an interview that the series revolves around the education of Peter Parker, which is why each episode is named after a topic of study, rather than something generic like Spider-Man fights the bad dude. Peter in this series is far from perfect. In fact, out of all the shows I've seen, this version of him leaves his loved ones in the dust the most, but we constantly see him forgive and regret. They manage to show the character's inner turmoil without having him become too melodramatic. And in general, the tone of the series strikes a great balance between the dark and lighthearted. It's along the lines of Homecoming, where there's always real stakes and danger, but there's a lot of fun and comedy along the way. The characters are pulled from many different facets of the Spider-Man franchise, from the Ultimate Comics to the Sam Raimi films. But I like how the show sticks to only Spider-Man characters, and doesn't try to bring in heroes and villains from the extended Marvel universe. I know that this kind of connected universe world building is a staple of comic storytelling, but this is such a nice refresher from the other Spidey shows. Having random Marvel characters show up and then disappear for an episode or two later is decent world building, I guess, but it takes focus away from everything else. It's like when The Simpsons has episodes that focus around the guest star of the week. Like, I don't really care what Elon Musk and Homer do together. What crazy adventures is Milhouse up to?
I'm telling you, I didn't do anything.
I don't care.
With a Spider-Man cartoon, having an extended universe isn't necessary. Spider-Man on its own gives you more than enough to keep a show afloat. While this decision may have come out of legal issues, it keeps the universe simple, and it gives super minor characters that I've never heard of before, like Boswell, a chance to become funny and interesting characters in their own right, and that's without even talking about the villain. The baddies manage to be just as fun to watch as the heroes, and they all have sharp and sleek designs to boot, including one of the only versions of Electro that doesn't make him look like he's wearing a Halloween costume or a rejected member of the Blue Man Group. The series makes a great effort to diversify its range of bad guys. There's focus put on villains that aren't regular members of the Sinister Six, along with figures in the background pulling the strings and controlling levels of crime, some beyond what Spider-Man fights on a day-to-day basis. Each episode we see the web-slinger tussle with both high and low-level criminals. This greatly helps expand the world, since we get an opportunity to see all of the sides to New York's criminal underbelly. The art direction of Spectacular Spider-Man goes for a look distinct from most superhero shows. It's reminiscent of action cartoons like Kim Possible and Danny Phantom. And while it may be more simplified than other Spidey shows, it makes the characters more animation-friendly, and leads to some fantastic-looking fight scenes. Each action sequence in the series is fast-paced and memorable, either for the location it takes place in, or the circumstances of the story. They really take advantage of the abilities of the villains, leading to some wildly unique scenarios, like in the episode First Steps, where Spider-Man fights Sandman, who's absorbed an entire strip of beach. Sandman, by the way, is my favorite villain of the show. He's also voiced by John DiMaggio, so you can put 2 and 2 together there.
Aw, man, my money!
Alongside the best voice cast for a Spider-Man show is some really great sound design. The electric guitar and motif-heavy background music gets you pumped up for the action, and there's some very distinct sound effects, like the sound for Spidey's web shooters, and how the bombs the Green Goblin throws laugh when they explode. It's those little touches that elevate the series beyond just another Spider-Man cartoon. And the intro, well, the intro is incredible. It acts as sort of a modern upgrade to the classic Spider-Man theme from the 60s show, and I'd argue that it's even better. I never skip it when watching an episode, and I'd even go as far as to say that it's one of the best theme songs to a superhero show out there. Now here's the part where I piss a lot of people off by saying remotely negative things about this show, though most of what I have against it are very minor problems. Season 1 of the series is very well paced and executed. There's a lot of small arcs that work well alongside standalone episodes that establish the series' rogues gallery. The best telling of the Venom saga and possibly the best ever take on Spider-Man's origin story cap it off really nicely too. But when Season 2 rolls around, the show gets a tiny bit cluttered. Characters like Aunt May and most of the Sinister Six get left behind as new facets in both Peter's life and the criminal underworld are introduced. While the episodes are still at a high level of quality, it almost feels like the season may have bit off just a bit more than it could chew. This doesn't affect the pacing of any episodes though. 2 to 3 new elements can be introduced in an episode, and the show can still make it all work together in one cohesive package. I admire how creative the show got during Season 2 as well, even though it may be a little cluttered. You may think an episode set during an opera show might be a dumb idea, but it ends up giving the episode a fitting dramatic tone. My feelings are mixed on the multiple twists they pull with the Green Goblin. To longtime fans, what they do might come as a surprise, but it seemed like they put a bit too much focus into trying to mess with the audience's expectations. It doesn't help that this is what the series ends with, making it seem like the last few episodes that focused on this could have better spent their time elsewhere. They also move on rather quickly from a plot point that involved Harry overdosing on performance-enhancing drugs. The subject is handled realistically enough, but it kinda gets swept under the rug by other events. I think it's admirable that the show went for this heavy subject matter in order to keep the story accurate with the comics, but the way they went about doing it sort of rubs me the wrong way. This incarnation of the Green Goblin is still really great, as they managed to make him seem both goofy and menacing, when other interpretations would just go for one or the other. In addition to this, in a few small ways, this series feels like a product of its time, though not at all to the extent that the 90s series was. The tone helps it fit in with a lot of the action cartoons that were circulating around during that time, and some of the background music just screams early to late 2000s. So, Spectacular Spider-Man is one of the best superhero shows period, but it's also the shortest series that I'm featuring here, and that's because of legal disputes. I'll try to explain what happened from what I know. The show was produced by Sony, and when Disney bought Marvel in 2009, they also bought the TV rights to Spider-Man. They did not, however, buy the rights to the license for Spectacular Spider-Man. This meant that despite the success the show had achieved, it was forced to end production because legally, Sony could no longer produce it, and that led to the series only having 26 of the planned 65 episodes produced. Luckily, it only ended on a minor cliffhanger, which simply opened the door for new stories rather than leaving major plot threads unresolved, and this would be far from the last Spider-Man show that we would ever get. To this day, fans are still pushing for a Season 3 to be produced, but I personally don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, simply due to the confusing web of legal jargon that the series is wrapped up in. Maybe we could see a continuation in like a comic book or something, but with a show based on Spider-Man, what's the point in making it anything other than animated? Plus, even if we did get another season, people would probably hate it because it was just slightly different from what they anticipated. And who even knows if all the original cast and crew would be able to return? I'd rather just stick with the fantastic 26 episodes that we got, rather than risk getting an inferior continuation that tarnishes the name of the series. The Spectacular Spider-Man was just filled with high after high. It succeeded in pretty much everything it set out to do, and had me hooked from the start to the abrupt finish. For me, it's probably my favorite on-screen adaptation that Spider-Man has ever had, encompassing so many different ideas from the franchise's history, and fleshing out each and every one of them in an interesting and accurate way. For what it is, this series gets a 9 out of 10 from me, and I would highly recommend that you check it out even if you're not a giant fan of action cartoons or superhero shows like me. Just savor Spectacular while it lasts, because when it comes to Spider-Man cartoons, it's only downhill from here.